This is the final episode of the story of Walter and Kristine. When Kristine and I talked last time, she mentioned that getting the diagnosis was the easy part. The hard part was navigating moving forward because there is no training manual. So, Kristine, I want to talk about how you did navigate that time with Walter. And just to recap, can you tell me how many years into Walter's diagnosis did he file for disability?
So, within the first year of Walter's diagnosis, we made the decision to file for disability. When Walter was put on interferon, that caused the palpitations, which led to going to the hospital and having a cardiac catheterization, which um, ultimately, or thank God, was negative. And realizing it was the interferon that was causing this fatigue and the palpitations, we realized he wasn't going to be able to continue working. So he was placed on FMLA, family medical leave. From there, we were able to go down to Social Security and apply for disability. And this was hard on Walter. He was somebody who worked his whole life as a teenager, working part time, his young adult life. Through marriage, he was always working. So this was very hard for him to come to the realization that he wasn't going to be able to work anymore. So we went down to Social Security to apply for disability to start that process.
Well, how did filing for disability change the way that you lived your life together? And how did it change Walter?
Um, it definitely changed the dynamic of our marriage. So no longer were we going to be a two income family. The financial responsibility was now going to be placed on my shoulders. So that was stressful for me. It was hard on Walter because now he was going to be staying at home. What did that mean for him? What would he be doing? Is he going to be, handling the laundry and cooking or doing whatever he would be able to do? We weren't sure at that point because everything was just so new. Um, as I mentioned, there was no manual with this disease. We didn't know what was going to come, after the initial diagnosis, what signs and symptoms, how was he going to decline? What sort of, timeline were we looking at? There, nothing was explained to us. So we really didn't know. We were just pretty much living day to day, uh, you know, and figuring it out as we went.
What was it like for you continuing to work and knowing that Walter was at home?
It was hard on me. It was definitely stressful. Um, I had to work a lot, especially while we were waiting for the disability to go through. So I was working a lot of extra shifts to supplement that income. And that had to be hard on Walter, uh, knowing that he now was not, contributing financially to the household. Um, and with interferon, a side effect, not only is fatigue a side effect, but people develop depression, and he did develop depression. He was put on an antidepressant to help cope with the depression that he was experiencing.
Well, how did you navigate that time then? Did you seek support from people, family, friends, church? How did you get through that yourself? And how did Walter get through it?
That's a tough question to answer. There's a lot of feelings that come up um, in regards to the support that we were receiving. Our church has always been amazing. They've always helped us out as much as they could. Um, our family um, lives in another state. So, as far as receiving support on that end, they did as much as they could. Um, when dealing with a rare illness, especially one like ECD, that at the time was still classified as an orphan disease. It had not been reclassified as a blood cancer. Trying to explain to people what this disease was, we were still trying to figure it out ourselves. So, when asking for help, um, it was hard because at times we didn't know what kind of support or help we needed. Because Walter was still in the beginning, so he was still active enough. Um, he did not look like someone who was dealing with a rare disease in the beginning. So um, it was just hard to ask people. Um, we were the only people in the state of North Carolina that we knew of dealing with this rare disease. So there wasn't anybody that we could talk to in the state of North Carolina that understood what we were going through. Um, I don't think that we had been connected with the ECD Global Alliance yet. That was um, a little further on down. So, um, yeah, I mean, as far as assistance in the beginning, we really did not require um, help. It wasn't until a few years later when Walter was really starting to develop um, some mobility issues where he had to go and get physical therapy, um, trying to coordinate dates and times with my work schedule. It put a lot on me. So our church was helpful where people would volunteer to take Walter so I could get some rest. That was greatly appreciated. Uh, when Walter was first diagnosed and we decided to go to MD Anderson in Houston, Texas, our church um, was able to collect some funds to help send us there. Um, so, that was greatly appreciated.
Well, ECD is an invisible illness. And with invisible illness, it can be really difficult for people to understand why you need help because the patient looks so healthy. You can't see what's wrong with them. But inside, there are all kinds of things going on. So I'm really glad that you had the support that you did. And I'm so glad that your church was able to pitch in as much as they did. I'm sure that that just gave you so much comfort knowing that you had that support.
It did. It really did. We were very thankful for the support that our church gave us during that time.
Well, ECD is such a complicated disease, and every patient's symptoms are very different, and every story is different. Did you and Walter ever talk about the possibility that he may not live as long as he should?
We honestly never discussed that. After the initial visit with the oncologist, where we were sitting in the doctor's office and had asked what Walter's life expectancy was, and he was honest and said he really didn't have an answer. He didn't know what Walter's life expectancy was. We just chose to live our life. Um, and we just decided to take it day by day.
That's smart. It's not really a whole lot you can do when you don't know what the future holds.
That's true.
I've mentioned in a previous episode that my husband Lance had the same disease that Walter did, Erdheim-Chester disease. And I know that as Lance's disease progressed, I felt the urgency to get out and do the things that we had talked about doing in our retirement years because we had no idea how long he was going to live. And so for us, that showed up as travel. I took him traveling as often as I could, which wasn't that much, but it seemed like a lot because traveling with a disability is really challenging. um, did you and Walter experience anything like that? And if so, how did that show up for you in your life?
So when Walter was first diagnosed and we didn't know how long he had, we decided to go on a second honeymoon. So we went to Cancun, Mexico for the week. That was shortly after he was diagnosed. We did that, and I'm so glad that we were able to do that. And then because of my work schedule and finances, we weren't able to travel as much after. But in 2016, I decided to take a break from work. I just needed to take a couple of months off. Um, and Walter's, his dream was always to go out west. He always wanted to go out west. So when I made the decision that I was going to take a break from work, um, and I could see that he was starting to have some mobility issues. At this point, he was using a cane to walker at times to get around. I thought that, well, this is the perfect time. We're going to go out west. So I spent a couple of weeks just planning our trip. Um, we went from North Carolina to Tennessee to Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. Um, we went to South Dakota, to Nebraska, Kansas, St. Louis. We even went to Peoria, Illinois, because Walter was such a big Dan Fogelberg fan. He was like his number one fan. And Dan Fogelberg was from Peoria, Illinois. They have a memorial park there. So I thought, oh, well, this will be the perfect time to go there. We can take out, drive them all the way to Peoria. We'll spend the day. Um, we'll go to the park and then come back to St. Louis. And from there, I told Walter, I was like, well, we can either do this. We can either drive to Kentucky and spend the night, or we can just make a straight run home, because this was like a 16-day trip. It was a long trip. We were there, it was over 2 weeks. By the time we were in St. Louis, he was like, yeah, I'm just really tired. Can we just go home? And I was like, sure. That was a 12-hour drive from St. Louis back home to North Carolina, but we did it. I don't know that I could ever do that again. Um, but so yeah, that was great. I mean, we went everywhere. We went to the Grand Canyon, to Yellowstone, to Mount Rushmore. Um, like I said, St. Louis. So it was a very memorable trip, and I'm glad that we were able to do it. Um, and then we were planning on doing a trip to New England in 2020. Unfortunately, COVID, you know, had other plans, and we weren't able to do that trip. Um, and at that point, Walter had declined so much that I knew that would have been our last trip. Um, but sadly, we were never able to do that trip to New England. Um, but other, like I said, we just had, you just have to live your life day by day. And with ECD, you never know what's going to happen. You're always trying to stay two steps ahead of a disease that you don't know what the next thing's going to happen. So, other than those two trips, if we weren't traveling back to South Carolina for, graduations or weddings, um, or birthdays, we were pretty much at home.
Well, I'm impressed that you drove through all those states in only 16 days. Oh my goodness, you must have been exhausted.
Yes, yes, I was. Because I was, at that point, I was doing all of the driving, the packing. Um, so it was a lot of, you know, spending the night in a hotel and then getting back in the car the next day and driving to the next state. So yeah, I was pretty tired by the end of that trip.
Hmm. I think something that people don't realize if they haven't dealt with a disability is when you travel with a disability, how much extra work it is. And like you just mentioned, you did all the driving, you did all the packing. And that means every time you get to a hotel, you've got to get everyone situated in the hotel and you've got to unpack everything. And then the next day when you leave, or a couple of days when you leave, you've got to pack everything back up. So yeah, it's a lot of work for one person.
Yes, it definitely is. Um, and then I also noticed that during that trip, I started to see the cognitive decline that comes with Erdheim-Chester disease. There were times, I remember one time we were driving through, I want to say it was Oklahoma. We were driving through Oklahoma, and Walter just looked over at me and he was like, "Where are we?" And I said, "We're in Oklahoma." He goes, "Why are we here?" And I said, "Well, remember, we're going out west. We're doing this big trip." And it just took him a while to sort of comprehend what was happening. And so it was a scary moment. It was, oh, what are we dealing with now kind of moment. Um, and I think at that point, ECD had been reclassified as a blood cancer because it was 2016. So we were there, we went in the summer of, we did that whole trip in the summer of 2016. So it had just been reclassified as a cancer, but we still did not know of the cognitive decline that patients with ECD would be experiencing. So that was interesting. Yeah, just dealing with, um, again, his mobility issues. One time when we were in Arizona, he actually had fallen in the shower, and thankfully he was not injured from that. But yeah, it's hard because I was by myself dealing with this. I didn't have anyone else helping me. Um, so yeah, you are right. It is it's tricky navigating all of that.
Wow. And I can't even imagine driving and realizing while you're driving that he is experiencing these cognitive issues, and realizing that for the first time. That had to have been a little bit scary.
It was.
I do have a couple more questions before we end this episode. But before I ask those questions, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would like to add?
A few years after Walter was diagnosed, and we were connected with the Erdheim-Chester Disease Global Alliance, they were going to have their very first conference, and it was held in San Diego, California. I was really excited about this because Walter had already connected with other Erdheim-Chester Disease patients through the ECD Global Alliance. And I was so thankful because he could talk to other patients who are experiencing symptoms that he was having. He could connect with people who were going through what he was going through. So I was happy for him for that. But as a caregiver, there was nothing for me. There was no ECD caregiver group when we were first starting with this. There was nobody I could talk to here in North Carolina because nobody had ever heard of Erdheim-Chester disease. So I remember flying out to San Diego for this 3-day conference and being able to connect with other caregivers for the very first time. I think people can agree with me. I think you can agree with me on this, how isolating this disease is, not just for the patient, but for the caregiver, because we did not have any support. So I was very excited about going to San Diego to meet other caregivers. And when we had our very first meeting, it didn't quite go as planned. The person who was scheduled to speak had to cancel or something had happened, so they had someone else come in. And unfortunately, this person wasn't able to relate to us. So we, at the end of the session, when they gave us the card to write our comments, I think we were all quite vocal about what we were expecting to talk about. So the next day, they called all the caregivers to one side and said, "We've read your comments, we hear you. We have scheduled another session where we want you to tell us, what it is like to be a caregiver. Tell us what it is that you need." So we all went to this conference room, sat around this table, and for the first time, we were able to tell our story. And I think that's just what we wanted. We wanted somebody to hear us. We wanted somebody to understand, somebody who could relate to what it was like to be a caregiver um, to a person who had such a rare disease. And through that, the ECD caregiver group was started. So I was able to finally tap into a community that I could talk to and say, "Hey, Walter is experiencing these symptoms. Is anybody else experiencing the same thing?" And so people could, chime in and say, "Yes, my loved one also experienced this. This is what we did. This worked for us. Maybe it will work for you." So I'm so glad that we were able to have, you know, this conference to be able to go to then have this group started. It helped me not feel so alone anymore. Um, now we have friendships that have, happened through this. When Walter and I did our cross country trip, we were able to stop off in several states to visit with other ECD patients. Um, you and Lance were one of them because you were living in Idaho at the time. I think it helped me more than Walter, that trip, because I was able to connect, see people that I hadn't seen since the conference.
Yeah, community is so important and it's very hard to find when you're dealing with such a rare disease. I know by the time we went to that conference, and I didn't take Lance with me, he was too sick at that time to travel. But he had already been sick for 18 years at that time. And I remember feeling that same thing in that first caregiver session. What was this? We hadn't had any support through all of it. And then that was such a letdown. So I'm really glad that they did provide a second session for us. And then I'm actually the one that started the caregiver group,
Mhm.
and ran that on Facebook, for several years. And just being a part of that group, you're so right. It was really the only outlet that we had where everybody understood the challenges that we were facing, even though everybody's story was different. We all were dealing with a very rare chronic condition that nobody could tell us what the future held. And it was so good to connect with people in that way. And that's actually why I started this podcast too, because caregivers are often forgotten and everybody's story matters.
Yes, I'd look back on that time with fondness. Um, Even though we were navigating this rare disease, um, that we were still trying to figure out. Um, but the fact that we were brought together by this common factor, this disease, that enabled us to form friendships, to help each other, to create a community, that to this day is still going on and helping this new generation of caregivers who are taking care of their loved ones with this disease. So I'm so proud of you that you did this. You have not, you created this caregiver group that has, how many years later, like 15, 16 years later, it's still, it's still going strong. And that's something to be proud of.
Well, thank you, Kristine. It's just it's one of those things where I thought for so many years, why didn't somebody do something about this before? If they had, then maybe we wouldn't have suffered as much as we did. And so that's why I do everything that I do. If I can build something now to help people in the future, it's completely worth it. So, and I'm really thankful for the friendships that I made during that time. And you mentioned caregivers supporting caregivers, but it's been beyond that, because the friendships that we made during that time, we're there to support each other after we lose our spouses too. And that's huge. It's just, it's hard to put into words what it means to have somebody you can communicate with, that you don't actually have to say a whole lot. You can just say, I'm having a bad day. You can
Mhm.
just say, this is a challenging thing that I'm going through. And they just understand. There is nothing like those friendships with other caregivers and other widows, because they just know.
I agree. I agree. Going back to when we had taken that trip out west and Walter started to have those, the first symptoms that I noticed of cognitive issues, I was able to connect on the caregiver chat group. And I said, I'm starting to notice Walter's having some cognitive issues. Is it, and at the time I thought we're the only ones that are experiencing this. No one else in the ECD world is experiencing this. And just by connecting with the group, finding out, oh no, this was happening to other people. And it was happening to the patients who were surpassing their life expectancy. So we were all able to go, oh, okay, so this is new. This is something new. You know, are they going to be doing a study on this? Or, what resources are available to help us navigate that? Having that group, you know, has been it's been a lifesaver. It really, really has.
Well, we've covered a lot in these episodes about your story of your life with Walter, but we haven't covered those final months, weeks, days. And I'm wondering if you want to talk about that at all, what that looked like for you and how you handled it.
Yes, I feel it's important to discuss that time in my life. So I would say about 7 months before Walter passed, he was receiving physical therapy, speech therapy, and we did have a home health aide come out to the house twice a week. This was all provided through Medicare. I was so happy that he was receiving this because it was extra support that I sorely needed. But with Medicare, how that works is after a certain amount of time, you've either met your goals or you have not progressed. Either way, Medicare only pays for a certain amount of time. So in the fall of 2020, Walter was receiving those services, but then he met his goals. So then that was, those services were no longer offered. And we were back to it just being the two of us. Walter was such a social person. He loved when people came to the house. Um, COVID really stopped all of that because everybody was encouraged to quarantine. And I remember when that first happened, visitors stopped coming to the house. And one day we were sitting on the couch and he just looked over at me and he said, "Is anybody coming to visit me today?" Oh, it broke my heart to have to tell him that visitors were not going to be coming for a while because of the pandemic. How much of that did he really understand about COVID, about this worldwide pandemic that's shutting the world down? You know, how much of this does he comprehend that people had to stop coming to visit him, not because they wanted to, but because they had to? In that time, I could really start to see a decline. And I often wonder if COVID played a bit of a part in that decline. I mean, obviously, the disease was progressing. He was on palliative care services, but when something like having people come and be social with you is taken away from you, it could really affect you, not just mentally, but physically as well. So he was experiencing that. And at that time, I was really starting to struggle with, okay, at what point do I quit my job to stay home with him or hire a caregiver to be with him while I am at work? So while doing research for that, and interviewing people, it was going to be half of my salary to have somebody come to the house to be with him while I'm working. Years ago, I tried to sign Walter up for Medicaid, where I could be hired as his CAPS worker, which is a program where family members can take care of a loved one who is either disabled. It could either be a disabled adult or a child, um, and trying to sign him up through that process, and then getting the call that he did not qualify because his Social Security disability was greater than what their guidelines for somebody who would qualify for those services. To me, that's shocking and it's alarming that that was the case, because with Medicare, it has to do with making a certain amount of money. And I looked it up in 2021. I have that here. I wrote it down. In 2021, to be considered for Medicaid, an individual person, their income could not exceed $13,788. Walter's Social Security disability was under that. So the fact that he did not qualify was upsetting, trying to get answers as to why that was the case. Was it my income factored in? I was being told that that was not the case. Anyway, knowing that a plan that I was trying to put in motion to be able to stay home with my husband was now not a possibility, that I was going to have to take on the financial burden of paying someone to come to the house to be with him so that I could work, so that I could pay the bills. It's just, there's something in our society that's wrong about that. Um, to pay into a system and then not be able to use it, changes need to be made. So I was really struggling with what to do at that point. Um, and I remember talking to someone at work about that. I was like, I'm torn. I don't know what to do. At what point do I just end up quitting my job? Do I take FMLA, which is for 12 weeks, and then figure out what to do from there? It really was, it was an unfortunate position to be put in. But then March of 2021, the second weekend in March, I did what I always did. I got ready for work, and then I went to go get Walter, to get him up, to fix his meal, to get his meds together, to get him ready. And he did not want to get out of the bed. He just said he was too tired. And I was like, okay, well, I'll bring your meal into the bedroom then. And so I set up a tray for him. And I said, are you sure you don't want to get up? And he said, yeah, I'm sure. I just want to sleep. And I said, okay. And I was hesitant about going to work, but I had to go to work. And you have to understand the mindset of somebody who's been a caregiver for as long as I had been. We were going into our 14th year of me being a caregiver, of me working full time at the hospital, working full time at home. I was taking care of somebody 24/7. I was exhausted. I was not thinking clearly. Um, so, and then I can think back now, I should have called in that night, but again, I was not thinking clearly. I went to work. The whole night, I was just, Walter was on my mind. I thought, I hope he's okay. Why am I at work? I should not be here. You beat yourself up over these things. I come home, he's still in bed. He has not touched his dinner. He said he was not hungry. So I took the tray out of the room. I cleaned him up. Then I went to bed because it was the morning. I'd finished my shift. I get up a couple of hours later, go through the motions again, get my coffee, get ready for work, go in to get Walter. And again, he does not want to get out of bed. And I said, okay, Are you hungry? Can I fix you something? And he just shook his head. I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat. And I knew it was time. I knew what was happening. So I notified my charge nurse, the house supervisor, the director of my floor. And I told them I couldn't come into work, that I needed to go on FMLA, that it was time to sign Walter up to hospice. And they were wonderful. Each of them contacted me and said, "Don't worry about it. We're taking you off the schedule." My director said, "I'll have somebody from HR call you on Monday to get the ball rolling on getting you on FMLA. But do not worry about anything. We've got you." So that Monday, I call palliative, tell them I need to have the nurse practitioner to come out to evaluate Walter because we needed to transition to hospice. So they came out Tuesday and evaluated Walter. I said, "Yes, it's time for hospice." Hospice came out on Wednesday. We signed him up. And 5.5 weeks later, he passed.
I know that's so hard to talk about. Thank you for your bravery in sharing that. I know how challenging it is. And I would like to say that we can always look back and beat ourselves up over the things that we didn't do or the things that we feel like we did wrong. But one of the things I have realized since Lance passed away is that when you're with someone all the time, watching them decline, you don't pick up on those cues anymore like you used to because it's just a constant decline. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. You know, looking back now, I could see the decline. um, and like I said, I was physically and emotionally exhausted. And it's just when you're put in a position like that, it's so hard to think clearly. And it is so easy after the fact to question the things that you did. Um, I spent a long time working on myself, saying you did the best that you could with what you had, you know, with the support that was given to you. I was the one alone that had to make these decisions that, you know, whether they were right or wrong, those were the decisions that I made. Um, and, you know, I'm the one that has to live with it.
And again, it's so easy to beat ourselves up. I I've followed your journey, Kristine, and I think you did an amazing job. And I know how hard it is when you are caring for a spouse and it's just the two of you and they have cognitive decline and they have mobility issues, how much pressure that is on you.
Mhm.
You have to become superwoman and it's hard. It's a really
Mhm.
hard life. So I'm really proud of you for the job that you did. And I know that Walter always knew how much he was loved because of you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was hard, factoring in a pandemic as well. I know you went through the same thing, dealing with Lance's illness and um, his passing in the middle of a pandemic. Um, it's like you said, we do the best that we can. And I know, Lance, I too followed your journey. I too, when you would send messages, um, telling us things that were happening, and um, you know, all you can do is just be there for each other, support them, and pray for them, and just let them know, even though we're in different states, miles away, we're there for you.
That community is so important, spread out around the world. But that's who I always reached out to was our ECD community. We needed each other. I don't know if this is something that you want to talk about, but what did you do to care for yourself after Walter died? I think that this is such an important question, um, because after you've been a long-term caregiver, your focus has been on the other person for so long, it can be really hard to care for yourself. So I'd like to know what you did to care for yourself and what you continue to do.
Yeah, after Walter passed, I would say that I went through a bit of an identity crisis because I went from being a wife and a caregiver, and as a profession, a nurse. Uh, when Walter died, I just sort of went, oh my gosh, who am I? Who am I now? If I am not a wife and a caregiver, who am I? I didn't even know if I wanted to continue on as a nurse. Do I still want to assume that role of, you know, taking care of patients in a hospital when I don't even know how to take care of myself right now? So I decided to take a year off and just focus on myself. And the first thing was to forgive myself for the things that I was not able to do for Walter that I wanted to be able to do. Because again, I did the best that I could with what was given to me. And it took a while to get there. Um, and I still have days, but for the most part, I know I did the best that I could. Walter, in the beginning, as I mentioned, when he was first diagnosed, that little bit of information that we were able to read about when it said life expectancy of 3 years, he surpassed that. He lived 14 years. Um, so I'm proud of that, you know, he lived as long as he did. I feel like a lot of that had to do with the care that was given to him. Um, Second, I needed to focus on me, on my health that was in horrible decline. Being a caregiver wears on you physically. I remember when Walter, the last year of Walter's life, I was so tired physically and emotionally. There were times I thought, I am going to die before him. I am so tired. So I knew I needed to focus on my health. I needed to focus on my mental health, my spiritual health. So that's what I did for that year. I focused on me. Um, And I have a friend of mine who is a hiker. So when she said, "What's one of the first things you want to do?" I was like, "Oh, I need to get back in shape." She's like, "Great." Um, we went the first time there's a lake here near my house. It has a beautiful walkway, a pathway. You can, it's like 2.6 miles around the lake. And the first time she took me, I had to stop 3 times. I'm not kidding. There's one part where there's a bit of an incline, and I had to stop halfway up the incline to catch my breath. And I was like, so upset with myself and ashamed. I was like, how did this happen? Well, it happened because I was focusing all of my energy on taking care of other people and not myself. Um, and now I am at a point 4.5 years later where come this February, I'm going to run in my first 5K.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh my goodness. I'm so proud of you, Kristine.
Oh, yeah.
I can relate to everything that you said. And I'm so glad that you took that time to focus on yourself, to get yourself back to health, because it does happen when you're a
Mhm.
full-time caregiver. You kind of do the bare minimum to care for yourself to get by because you know that they can't do what they need to do. So you do it for them.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate so much that you were willing to share your story with us. I know that it wasn't easy, but I know that it's going to be helpful to so many because even though all of our stories are different, there are always bits and pieces that we can relate to and feel less alone. So thank you for being here and for being willing to share your story, Kristine.
Mhm. Thank you, Ruth Ann. Thank you so much for letting me share my story. And I hope there's somebody out there that hears it and realizes that they're not alone, that, you know, being a caregiver is super hard, but there are people out there that are going to support you, that are there for you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks so much for listening today. And be sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on a single episode. I'll see you next time.